It's March 11, 2021, and we're learning about Dignitas' new amateur team from Coach Invert and taking questions live on the air from listeners. This is the True Sight Podcast. Welcome to the True Sight Podcast by Oracle's Elixir, your source for in-depth analytical coverage of professional League of Legends and the rest of the esports world. I'm Tim Magic Sevenhusen. Today, we've got a bit of a different show. I'm joined by Dignitas coach Gabriel, Invert, Zoltan Johan, and we're going to talk about the big news that his org announced this week, but we're also going to spend some time hearing your questions and opinions and responding to them, talking through it. So if you're listening live, make sure you head to the Oracle's Elixir Discord server, or prep your question in Twitch chat, and we'll select some things that we want to talk about and respond to there. So let's kick things off by welcoming Invert to the show. Invert, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Oh man, my voice.
You
says
sound
otherwise.
like it.
Yeah, no, I'm doing great. I just walked my dog. I have a little cozy Dignitas hoodie. It actually hailed in Los Angeles yesterday for a brief period of time.
That's
so
different.
The world has brought many new things as of late. First that, and now a new Dignitas team. So I'm excited. I'm happy to be here and happy to talk about all that. So
Yeah.
and whatever the viewers cook up for us.
Yeah, we'll see. Let's talk about that. So your role, for people who aren't familiar with kind of you and what your work is in the org. So you work with Dignitas, you're a coach, you're coaching the academy team, but you're also involved in, kind of below the academy level. So with the news being this week that Dignitas has partnered with Mirage, which is an org that has been running teams at the amateur level for a while, has multiple teams, or did at least, they had their main team, and then they had I think another developmental team below that. You can correct me if I've got that wrong. But you guys have announced that they're kind of being folded into the organization and receiving Dignitas co-branding. Like, what are the details? How does this actually work, and what's that? What does this partnership look like?
Yeah, of course. I mean, partnership as it implies means that we're not taking over Mirage or buying the org out or anything like that. We're working with them to field an amateur team. This team was scouted and trialed ever since December, and those trials included scrims against our academy team, working with a wide variety of coaches that we were also trialing, working with myself, working with on occasion getting interviews from some of the LCS players and their thoughts, etc. So it was a pretty intensive process to come up with who we have today. Of course, that process, some people went with other teams, some people we declined and then went with other teams. Again, it was pretty painstaking, and we worked with Mirage throughout the whole process, and through the partnership, we're providing professional resources to these players. We have a lot of creative solutions when it comes to making these players better beyond just, you can watch scrims. It's also if you request particular POVs with comms of a particular player you want to see, if for support, Trevor wants to see how Afro is doing a particular matchup with his POV directly, we get that on a Google Drive for him as soon as possible, things like that. Or one of the more creative solutions that, of course, is pandemic permitting, is we want to do our best to have in-person experiences for these players as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, the possibility of a boot camp, things like that. Again, pandemic permitting, I want everyone to be as safe as possible during these times, especially in Los Angeles.
No kidding.
But various creative solutions like that. I think the amateur team provides a lot of value when it comes to the org, especially an org like Dignitas, where we've bought into the North American talent mantra, and we're putting our money where our mouth is when it comes to that stuff. And I think it's been a great few months for the org when it comes to that. I'm glad people are very receptive to it, and that we've kind of captured the zeitgeist in the correct way. So
Yeah, and especially because when you look at like the LCS level of Dignitas and the success that the team's been having, and having all the NA players there, but really, especially, I think what is exciting is that the success at the LCS level, to me, has mostly been driven by FakeGod and Soligo, who are new players coming in, guys who have been around a little bit at the academy level, had a little bit of a kind of a cup of coffee in the LCS before, but are now coming back in for their more a shot where they don't get thrown in mid-season but come in from the start. But seeing those guys succeed, to me, has been the most exciting part. So
yeah, and to me, I think it bellies the idea of like LCS experience. Like we talk about LCS experience or academy experience as this monolithic thing that if you have it, no matter what, it's like good for everyone to have, or it's universally a good thing for a person to have. But people always like fail to see the nuance or context in those experiences, right? Like for example, people cite Yasui as, this guy's like an old head, he's been around forever, what have you, neglecting the fact that for like 3 years he pretty much didn't play the game in between 2015 and 2020. So for me, you really have to look at contextually what the idea of experience looks like. In the case of Soligo and FakeGod, Soligo and FakeGod played in very weird circumstances, right? Yeah. Like Soligo had to play and replace Someday, and very experienced, very great player, and work with Ryu, who a year later pretty much stopped playing and became a coach. Like
you said Soligo, but you meant FakeGod replaced Someday.
Oh, sorry, yeah, and Soligo in his debut games played against Bjergsen and Jensen in lane. Yeah. When even in lane, the team comps weren't the best, and then they lost out, and then it was like, okay, for me, how do I contextualize any player's experience? It's not just he has LCS experience, therefore he should know everything. How can you possibly hold that opinion while also being concerned about the level of LCS in terms of gameplay quality, etc., right? Like we can't write off these people for having LCS experience while simultaneously writing off LCS experience as particularly relevant. I think it's a terrible oxymoron to have.
Well, and I think that kind of approach gets applied a level down too when you have players in amateur who have academy experience or LCS experience, and they're getting like, well, but that player's not interesting to look at anymore, like Fnatic on Mirage, or even Viper in Anda, like, and you're like, oh, people aren't really, these aren't even real amateur teams, or well, no, I mean, they're players who are trying to get back to the next level, and I don't think there's any reason to say just because they've had a chance in the past to some extent that there isn't a different approach or a different environment or just the passage of time that can make them interesting again, right?
Yeah, I mean, let's take an example from every other region, right? Like, people were not as up in arms as they are about NA situation as like Febivent in Fnatic Academy, or in the situation where people are given second chances. Leyan in the LPL is a great example of this, where I believe is in Rare Atom right now. That team is doing incredibly well in the LPL, and he kind of bounced off from a stint in IG that was less than stellar in order to do that. So, it's not just a North America thing. It's just how people manage and think about talent and contextualize the experience of that talent in general that I think is really important.
Yeah. Wrapping up a little bit, talking about kind of the Mirage partnership and how you guys land in this position. I think it is, all of this is very relevant to you guys and the players you have in Academy and so on. But, was it always Dignitas' intention to work with an existing org in amateur, or was there ever discussion of, taking the Cloud, I guess, the Cloud9 approach is, I'm just trying to think, maybe Evil Genius is a better example. No, not them either. A lot of these orgs ended up working with a roster that already existed, but then, like completely folding them in, saying, no, this is our team. Was it always going to be this partnership model, or were there other
Well,
approaches explored?
well, the interesting thing about those teams, like for example, in the case of EG and I believe to some extent C9 and 100 Thieves Next, yeah, they just scouted the teams and then took like a block of the players from those teams or those
replace
teams
one or two maybe.
entirely. Yeah, exactly. And for us, like I wasn't as interested in that. When I look at, that's a really good idea. If you're 100 Thieves Next or 100 Thieves LCS, to be in like win now mode or like do well now mode. Our goal with this project is not to be satisfied with what we look like day one. In fact, we should be, looking at day one as like, man, we suck, like we're just coming together, getting everything sorted, getting these players accustomed to everything, working together, being on a team, being social with one another, trusting one another. And then let's see what we look like at day 100, day 200, where we get this ball of amazing talent, like these guys are so talented, and then get them to work together, put all the pieces together, give them the professional resources, and see where they go. And I mean, so far in the tier 1 tournament, we finally had time to work with these guys directly for 2 weeks straight. The schedule did not permit a lot of great opportunities to work directly with the players, and now they look great. Like they're still in the tier 1 tournament, 2 more series. They play against an academy team tonight, I believe, and that's a team that when they weren't leveled up the way I think they are now, they took a game off the team in a pretty exciting fashion. So looking forward to seeing how they perform. I think they'll do very well. I hope they do well. We did not go into this taking like a block of players, replace one or two. I just looked for talent, like who looks mechanically good, who looks good in team fighting, who has like a basic understanding of lane mechanics that we can level up, things like that. So
yeah, and I think knowing that you guys were, getting into this in December and starting to prep it and set things up, I think that should potentially change some people's approaches to how they think about what you guys have done. You haven't just taken an existing roster, like you said, and let's work with that roster. That you actually had some kind of hand in selecting the players you wanted to work with, and I think that does modify kind of what the expectations should be of how some of this worked. And it took a while for the announcement to come out. I think there was behind the scenes, it was a bit of an open secret, but here it is, and you guys announced it, and I'm sure we'll touch on all this a little more, but I know there's some people who are waiting to get on the show and share some stuff, and it may be directly relevant to this and maybe on some other things, but let's open the floor a little bit. So I'm going to pull in Copiz, who has a take that he wants to share with us.
Diggity dog, I'm on the True Sight podcast.
How are you doing?
Doing well. So my take today is basically try not to just flame Golden Guardians, but kind of criticize the whole idea that they're a development roster and that they failed to make what I see as a successful development roster.
Okay. Let's hear it.
All right. So kind of the background, which you all know, of course, is that Golden Guardians had a decent team at the end of 2020, but budget constraints hit and they had to kind of adjust their goals accordingly. So they decided since they wouldn't win 21 with their budget, they should focus on development. I think this is great. It makes sense to me. Invest in upcoming talent and hope your stonks investments go to the moon. But it just didn't really work out that way. It was executed really poorly. So right from when they announced the roster in November, I thought it was really clear that the roster was a 10th place roster. With like Niles and Iconic specifically, they were way too green. They weren't even the best players in the amateur. They were good. Several people had their eyes on them, specifically Niles, I think. But like Tenacity and Kenvi were clearly ahead of them, and they were more comparable to players like Rodov and Mike Young, who, when they were last in Academy, were kind of the bottom tier there. And so the other parts of the roster, Blaze Olive, I think, was actually looking decent enough in Academy that it was reasonable to promote him there. And then Newbie, I didn't know anything about. Once he's been in the game, I've been really worried about him. I wasn't sure he was properly scouted. Some of his play in the game, like his lack of focus on killing Stixay with his Janna, unable to interrupt the World W because he's standing too far back. Just a lot of his basic things kind of had me worried. I was wondering if that's the type of stuff they should have scouted together better to begin with. But kind of more relevant is like the Stixay pickup as their single choice as a veteran, which I thought was really weird as well because Stixay's been on a downward trend for a while. He doesn't have this experience with winning, but a lot of the other veterans you might want to bring in could. And in my opinion, ADC is probably the worst role to kind of have as your veteran. You would think like actually Dignitas shows us your jungle or support make a lot more sense to have your veteran presence. They have more control and shot calling over the map and the plays you want to make. While ADCs is probably the easiest role to plug in a rookie. And it's the most good hands role where you just want to have good mechanics there. And so kind of when we're plugging in this 10th place roster, I feel like it's a lot harder for players to develop when they're on the clear 10th place team. The morale's going to be really low. I think it's actually been better than you might expect, at least based off Niall's fun tweets and stuff. It seems like they're still being relatively positive in the background, but I think it's a lot harder to keep positive morale and believe in yourself when you keep losing. I think there's a good chance top teams just won't scrim them anymore. And so I think their practice will actually be worse than a lot of the Academy team players are getting. If you're on C9 Academy or 100 Thieves Academy right now, then there's a good chance you're getting internal scrims with your main roster, some of the best players in the world. You're winning, you're learning how to close out games, all these good things. And so basically, I think even being on a top Academy team is better than being on the Golden Guardians main team right now for your development. And I think we saw that when players like Isles were choosing to go onto C9 Academy over a bottom tier team like Immortals.
Okay, so I think there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah. I would say a couple things to start. The first thing is this whole idea of newbie is, don't let the name fool you. Like that guy has been around for a while too. He's a support veteran in Latin America. He's won trophies in Latin America, right? Like I don't want to suggest that, of course I don't think he has been performing his best in North America so far, but that's some veteran like an additional veteran presence in the bot side. Even if you disagree about the ability for Stixay to be a veteran presence, even though he has done well internationally, he has won.
They reached finals of MSI with Stixay, and they won championship with him in LCS
so take that for what you will. It was a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe one could say that experience doesn't matter enough. But for newbie specifically, I think that there is a kind of veteran presence there as well on the bot side for this more green top side, as you point out. I got to work with Iconic in Scouting Grounds as a part of Dignitas. I do agree at the time I thought he wasn't ready for the LCS or Academy. But I think people have been pretty surprised by his performances recently. Niles, they've been surprised, but kind of in another way, I suppose.
And I would say on the Iconic front, when it came to Scouting Grounds, a lot of the buzz going into that event was that kind of behind the scenes, coaches and so on that I spoke to, actually a lot of them felt Iconic was the strongest jungler at the event and were actually really, really high on him, higher than I was. I didn't have the strongest personal opinion of him, but a lot of other people really did, and they thought he was really good, actually. Maybe not LCS ready, but for that level. Strong prospect.
Yeah, and so for me, I would say two things. I can't, of course, when they had to make the pivot, which they've been very open about, it seemed like it was fairly late into the off season as well. So I can't speak to their choices vis-a-vis the choices they had available to them to create their roster. And I also can't speak to, I don't think any of us can speak to what their timeline is, their development goal timeline is. I reference this with the whole Mirage idea, but it's is their timeline split one? If so, they're not quite hitting it, right? Is their timeline a couple of years to work with Niles and Iconic, or still very young players? Normally it feels weird because we don't normally give prospects a year or two to flesh themselves out, but maybe they're trying that. Maybe they're seeing if that works. I don't know, and so I can't value or grade their actual progress on their goal because we don't even know what their goal is. We can impose a goal onto them and then judge them based on that, but I think it's unfair to that team. They're 10th. They look like the worst team in the LCS for sure. Does that mean that they're not fulfilling their goal? I don't know. I don't think they look horrible overall. I think, for example, the GG Immortals game was a great game. That's a game that shows me they're thinking about the game. They're making decisions at a pretty high level. It's just the consistency is not there. And so then there are games where Niles and Iconic are Gregus Skarner sitting behind the Dragon Pit on bot side and committing to a 2v4 while the rest of their team is off the map. Then there are moments like that where it's the consistency and the decision making is actually not there. And so for me, it's just how much time does Golden Guardians give them? We can talk about. I just don't think it's fair for us to judge them based on a goal that we impose. We don't even know what their timeline is. Yeah. But they look like the worst team in the LCS. I agree with you on that.
I think they've been clear that their goal is not a split one team. The whole roster is locked up through the end of 2023, which I believe is as long as you can sign a player.
3-year max.
So they're definitely focused on a long-term goal. My criticism isn't so much as your 10th place now, which was clear, but more as you don't have these pieces. You don't have what I see as good veterans that can help you develop your players to improve. And so if you're trying to have this 3-year guideline, how are your players going to improve at the same rate as players on Cloud9 Academy that you're going to be competing against for a spot in a couple of years, or 100 Thieves Academy, who are playing on better teams with better players right now, while still being just as young and promising from the amateur team and getting to have those internal scrims and all that positive practice.
Yeah, so I think I agree with some parts of this. I agree with the idea that, I agree with Invert about Newbie that this is actually a player who is pretty experienced, and when you look at it from a certain angle, the Stixay Newbie pairing is supposed to be veteran core in the bot lane together. But the part of that I don't really like is where I agree with you, Cope, is the Newbie is a player who, sure, he's won titles in Latin America, has quite a bit of competitive experience, but he's coming into an entirely new region. He needs maybe not as much time to adapt and adjust as Niles and Iconic do coming into the LCS, but he's going to be off balance for a while too. He's not going to be the solid rock for them to base themselves on, because he's adjusting. And you saw the content piece they put out about, I hope everybody watched the Golden Guardians content piece on Newbie that came out last week, I believe. Really, really good. But it's mostly talking about Newbie falling down and getting back up at different times. And in coming into the LCS now is another opportunity for him to come in and be like, all right, I've just climbed up to another level, right? LCS is a higher level than LLA. And so he's not a rookie. By no means is he a young development piece, in my opinion, but he is coming in with still is going to need a while to get his feet under him. So making him part of your veteran foundation, quote unquote, to help the other players develop around doesn't really make sense to me, if that's the idea. And so if you kind of have 3.5 new players with Stixay and kind of Newbie's experience, that is a very inexperienced weighted kind of a roster that I think plays into what you're saying, where it's going to be tough for them to learn at a fast enough pace. But there is also the other side of all this, like Invert was saying, when you have to make a pivot in your off season a little bit later on, you can say, we don't think Niles and Iconic were the right players to bring in for this. You need people who are a little further along, and maybe aren't going to need 1.5 years to get up to LCS speed, but maybe only need 6 months. But who else is there? Who are the players that you bring in instead of them? And same on the Stixay front. Who is you got to have specific ideas in mind, and it would be I don't have those. I'm sure there were some you could bring up, but I don't have them in front of mind.
I think it's fair to say you have to have names because the pivot could have happened late. But even if you just go off unsigned players like Solo or Zeyzal, Zeyzal's someone who has experience winning and closing games, who maybe he isn't the best player, but he's a solid player, and there's hope that he could be a bounce back player in the LCS. And Solo, who was really good all throughout the LCS level, of course, you can question him at the Worlds level, but as far as someone that has experience and just had a year of winning lots of games to try and bring in some rookies, I think that'd make a lot more sense. And then if Solo's on the male team and you believe in Niles for your academy team, then maybe he can help teach Niles to get to that point.
Yeah. What I would say to that too is like we have to gauge the intention of the team versus the intention of the player, right? Like it's all well and good that Solo is going to, you know, theoretically do this, but would he want to do that, right?
Yeah.
Would he want to go from winning worlds to going to a team where the team is very clear that we are not in win now mode, right? We are not competing for an LCS title. You
And
know,
that might
we're
apply to
here
Zazel too,
develop-
right? Like,
Yeah,
hey,
exactly.
We want you to join our team. We're probably going to be 10th place and then win a few games at the end of the year. Do you want to join?
Yeah, it's like,
And
it's like our
that's something
goal
that
is to ramp
yeah.
up and scale. Like some players don't want to buy into that idea. You know, I
Understandably,
know
yeah.
I know of a few situations in off season where you know, it's a reverse of the Isle situation that you pointed out, where it's like I don't want to be on a team with this project in mind, with this idea in mind, and that might be what caused a disconnect between the team and that player in the off season. You know, like that as much as that intent in the Isles case that you brought up matters, it can be the same on the flip side, where yeah, maybe Zazel was like, hey, let me go to amateur, crush everyone, and you know, take that experience as a way to show myself off to the LCS teams and prove that I'm still a good LCS player.
Yeah.
You know,
And get on a 6th place roster.
right? And to that point too, it's like that's where the flexibility of amateur may come in, where the length of contract is a year versus like put a 3-year contract in front of Solo. It's like, you're part of this development project. We're not going to win in this time. That might, or like, you know, especially not the first year, maybe he doesn't want to do that, you know?
Yeah.
There are moving parts to it for sure.
I don't know what the conversation with the players look like, and I think if you do bring in some of the veterans, you don't have to necessarily like know you're going to be 10th place like the Golden Guardians roster we all did before this split started. I guess the other thing I want to look at is just some data from Oracle's Elixir, and kind of wonder if have they been developing. So I've kind of pulled up all this team stats from the lock-in tournament from Golden Guardians versus the regular split from Golden Guardians, and I wanted to kind of compare and see if they're doing better now than they were in lock-in. And it's pretty much, there's a couple random stats you can let, but kind of across the board, they've done worse in the spring split than they did in the lock-in tournament, despite having to like double play EG and stuff, since they actually made it past the best of ones in the lock-in. And so just kind of see they're trending downward.
Yeah,
Just
all
kind of
I
worry.
can say is Golden Guardians previously has been a team that has trended upward, and you know, it's just a Jimmy Harrison difference, and unfortunately Jimmy Harrison is just a part of Dignitas now. So
Well, Copiz, I'm gonna let you go. We're probably gonna move on to the next topic in a second here, but thanks for calling in.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more that could be discussed with Golden Guardians. I think it is. We are still only like 2 months of competition in, and I think it is fair to start having opinions about Golden Guardians' development trajectory, but I think it is still pretty early to start forming conclusions. So, but it's a conversation worth having at least, and we're gonna have to keep watching it. We've got a question in the chat here, Invert. There's been discussion at a lot of different times. This is a question from Tab2GG. What do you feel about the state of League of Legends coaching in NA, and in terms of like, you know, is it a high enough quality for what the league needs, and where there are gaps in knowledge, how do you think those can get filled in?
I think league coaching in NA, or I guess league coaching in general, has a standardization problem where we do not have parameters to accurately judge the quality of a coach, and there are normally ways to do this in traditional sports and many different forms of competition. For example, I did debating in university. There's a way to be like a registered debate coach and qualify for that. But yeah, we have a standardization problem when it comes to coaching in NA, whether it comes from experience on like the solo queue side, on competitive side, understanding concepts. Like there are certain terms that league coaches use that if you were to poll those coaches as to what those terms mean, you could get
3 different answers.
Many different results, right? That in essence is an issue, right? When we can't even agree on the definition of term. So I think that has to be the first step before anything else, because standardization of the education of the role weeds out all the like problem children that maybe fans are worried about or that people are thinking about when they think about inadequate coaching.
I think you do have a lot of trouble, and I think it's a bit of an inherent problem in terms of like terminology and concepts and so on, that the game itself changes fast enough on one level that if you lock down a term and your understanding of it, it might change next season. There are fundamental enough things that aren't going to worry about that, but then you also have the other problem on like tempo was one of the buzzwords, I'd say, a couple of years ago. And nowadays,
still is, I think.
No, it is. It's super important. But I hear people talk. I do hear the take now and then, like, you're talking about tempo so much. Let's stop talking about tempo. That's so 2018. I'm like, wait a second. Like, you just get tired of a term, so you don't want to use it anymore? No, like, tempo is absolutely fundamental, and will never, like, the ways you express tempo or apply it are going to change with the meta. But it is an inherent concept in League of Legends. So I think you get a little bit of buzzword fatigue
that's one of the terms that can mean so many different things at once, right? That just is crazy. Shifting is another one. I've heard like multiple different definitions.
Until Cadrill's video last week, I had not heard the term short shift. I'm like, okay, who's saying short shift? Like, where does that come from?
Right. Yeah. So anyways, if we can't even agree on, and I think this is where like, this sounds weird, but like where like a gathering of coaches, like a coaching conference can come in, to help establish that and make that happen. I don't think we're anywhere near that thing happening, or like possibility happening. I know something like that happened previously. When I first joined the league during franchising, but I the way I see it, league coaching, because we don't even educate coaches either. That's the other thing, is we don't even educate coaches in amateur in any meaningful, reasonable way. They have to use public content to do it. Like no one not until these amateur programs takes coaches under their wing to educate them. So like, for example, for myself, like when I was at the University of Toronto, did very well. When I got into Academy and I was learning under Rapid Star, St. Vicious, like that was a school of hard knocks for me. Like I had to really focus on taking what I already knew, scrubbing half of that off because it's probably wrong, and then figuring out the rest of the professional game, and also how to talk to players and be that emotional and support system for them simultaneously. So that of course, all those things in confluence made it really, really hard for me. Of course, it was really rewarding, but there's just like no one. That's not a standard process, and I think that's the deeper underlying issue, is that's not a standard process for coaching. As a result, coaching is all over the place.
I agree. All right, we've got another call here to take. We're going to bring MagicalQaz onto the show. So you want to say something about Academy play format. So what are your thoughts here?
For sure. I thought that for a lot of the top teams, they don't get to play as many games as like bottom Academy teams or amateur, just given the nature of the league. I thought it would be best for Academy to move towards a best of 3 format, just so they can get more games.
Season, you mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
sure.
I pitched this actually. I was like, I pitched this last year when people were discussing format changes. I said, insofar as we consider viewership secondary to the goals and needs of Academy, and best of 3 it was nixed due to viewership concerns, that we should just we should just make Academy best of 3 for development purposes.
Yeah, and for some context on this for people who might not be familiar with the overall structure. So what was changed this year for Academy is instead of doing a double best of Robin or double round robin regular season with single games, they're doing a single round robin. So they play each other team once over the course of 4.5 weeks. And then the bottom Academy teams have to play through the Tier 1 tournaments against amateur teams to try to qualify into Proving Grounds later in the spring. And so the idea is now they're only playing 9 games of regular season play, and now they might have, a 4-week break before they get to go into Proving Grounds?
We had like a 6-week break, actually.
Wow.
We're in week 4 of we're just about done week 4 of the break, so
yeah, so like if you do play, I can totally see the argument for playing best of 3s in that if you're doing a single round robin, you play best of 3s, you're getting 2.5 times as many games, depending on if you 2-0 all your series or not. It's the same amount of prep, right? If you got to prep more drafts per matchup, but that's not really, that doesn't really put a whole lot of extra burden on.
Mm-hmm.
I can totally see it.
I think there's also... Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that it's good experience with for players to get best of experience as well. And I think in general, Academy should start pivoting a little bit more towards development than viewership, just given that I don't think Academy will ever be as large or as big as a viewership pool as LCS is, just given how G League is generally lower, or NHL hockey leagues too.
Yeah, the AHL, OHL. For me, yeah, I'm aligned with you on that. I think development first, viewership second is definitely my mindset towards it. I would also say 2 things. One is that I know the LCS is reworking itself pretty heavily right now to increase its value as an entertainment product. I think Academy can be similar to these other leagues that you mentioned, like the G League, AHL, OHL. We could look at soccer and look at the lower divisions below the top in Europe and see that there's also opportunity for experimentation of the entertainment product through Academy, so that it could be the vehicle for improvements on the LCS side. So one idea from before I remember that was really well received was Academy Rush, right? Of course, given the format, that doesn't matter as much. It's not as possible to do that, but I think Academy can also be that kind of experiment zone, that testing ground for stuff that can be transmuted onto the LCS broadcast and make it a better entertainment product as well. So
Academy Rush last season was basically they had 5 games going on at the same time, and they were all being solo cast, and they would cut back and forth between them to get updates in each game. Was that well received? I don't actually know. Somebody else would have to tell me.
Internally, my understanding was that it was well received.
Okay. I think I saw some people who really enjoyed it. Personally, I can't remember the last time I ever sought out a highlights package of a game. And I didn't watch Academy Rush, and I just watched the VODs afterwards because I want to see the whole game. But I don't represent the entire audience, right? I watch the games at the Academy level because I'm trying to scout the players and share that with the audience. I'm the only Academy content creator there is. So yeah, so a diehard kind of person like me, I don't think did receive Academy Rush well, but I know there were people out there who did. So I don't actually have a good read on what the audience thought of that concept. But if people liked it, great, good for them. I don't think you could pull that up to the LCS level.
I think there's like an avenue that maybe like you could combine levels of that concept, maybe like 2 games at once with highlights from 1 or 2 on like a main channel, and then like what like whole games being streamed elsewhere. Because like you could then play multiple games, you could still get that increase in viewership partially. And like people that really want to watch the full games, it's there. It's only 2 matches instead of 1. So you could definitely get like 4 casters. There's a ton of like really great academy and amateur casters.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, and I think they're open to a lot of different things to try to. I don't know. I haven't gotten the impression that LCS viewership has been as bad as some of the doomsday scenarios out there are claiming it is. I think it's a little lower than you'd like, but some of that is also just by direct comparison to LEC, and being lower than LEC doesn't necessarily mean that it's straight up bad. I don't know, but
yeah, we'll have to wait for kind of the numbers to be out. I'm not too sure myself.
I know lock-in viewership I thought was actually pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
But I think people like best of fives, so that's part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
I'm so glad they did that.
Yeah, that was a good event. I don't know if they're going to do anything like that. They won't lead into summer with anything like that. I'm pretty sure that because they're just continuing regular season. But it was a good addition, I think, to the annual calendar. Kaz, thanks for popping in and sharing your take.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Now, Invert, we had a question in the chat as well that I think is pretty related to some of the stuff that we've been talking about. So to simplify it, paraphrase a little bit, like how do you manage kind of the tension between wanting to win games at the academy level versus wanting the players to get the best learning environment and development to prep them for a potential jump to LCS?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. How do I say this? I think you can prep for both simultaneously, and just as long as you understand that your real matches are also tests almost. Like they're tests on whether you've done everything correctly. And you just have to approach it with that mindset. Of course, players are always going to attach themselves emotionally to a win or a loss because they're competitors, and it's really important for competitors to win. So, but you just have to create little mini goals, side goals that they can also find victory or find solace in as well. So there's that aspect. Of course, winning an academy is also important for promoting to the LCS.
Yeah.
That's just the reality of the situation as well, where if you're winning, you're also potentially doing stuff right on a stage level. So
yeah, like I think the way I would summarize it is, it's possible to be winning academy without developing much as a player, but it's not really possible to be developing as a player and not winning at least to a reasonable extent in academy. If you're developing but not winning, then you're not actually developing.
Yeah.
There's context to that, right? If you come up against really, really good teams and you can't beat them, I mean, as long as you're playing competitive, there are, I guess, degrees of winning.
There's also context to the format as well, right? Like, this team went 9-0, but it's also like a bunch of best of ones, and best of one can be a pretty chaotic format.
High variance.
Yeah, exactly.
CLG can beat TL.
Exactly, right? So, excuse me. With that
TL
in mind,
can beat C9.
With that in mind, there's so many different ways in which to apply importance to those stage results. And now that Academy has less of them, arguably you apply even less importance to those stage results. At the same time, it's very difficult for a team who is not watching those Academy scrims because, they're probably participating in LCS scrims instead to actually, ruffle through the hay to find the needle, their only point of reference are those stage matches normally, unless they've scrimmed that team directly multiple times.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this has been pretty interesting. I think it's the first time we've done this, getting kind of direct listener input, and I think it's been kind of fun to do and to hear what some of you guys think, share our thoughts. I know, Invert, you've got to run pretty quick here. So before we let you go, what is the best way for people to follow you and your work?
Just follow my teams. I think the Dignitas Mirage teams plays tonight. Dignitas Academy, by virtue of making top 6, will be at Proving Grounds. I hope you cheer on both our teams as we look to support North American talent, of course our LCS team as well, and hopefully bring you guys that next generation of talent that you're craving so dearly.
Good stuff. And yeah, make sure you watch the Giant Slayer Gauntlet that's happening, in which Invert, as Invert mentioned, Dignitas Mirage is playing. And yeah, Proving Grounds will be covering that very closely in the run up to it, seeing which teams are qualified in, what our expectations are going to be for that tournament. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Get a lot of best of series, like we've been talking about, the value of those and the entertainment value of them too. So that's going to be great. You can support the True Sight podcast at patreon.com/oracleselixir. You can subscribe on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts, as well as anchor.fm/TrueSight. And make sure you check out the Oracle's Elixir Discord server to talk League of Legends esports, data science, and a lot of other topics. Links for all of those, as well as Invert's Twitter account and links to how you can follow some of those teams, will be in the show notes. This has been the True Sight podcast, and I'm Tim Sevenhusen. Thanks for listening.